This story was told to me by a trucker when I hitchhiked across the north of our homeland. He picked me up on the highway E105, which is in the Murmansk region between Monchegorsk and Pyrenga. By that time, I had been walking for 4 hours. It was getting dark. There was a forest around. There was a reserve. I don't remember the name of it. It was getting towards evening, and the cars were in no hurry to slow down, and even more so, when they saw me, they gave me gas, as if they wanted to get away as soon as possible. And only this trucker, probably, regretted it, and that was strange. He stopped 100 meters ahead, leaned out of the passenger window and pointed his flashlight at me. The sun was already hidden behind the horizon, of course, but it was not quite dark, and he kept looking at me the whole way to the car. I came up. He didn't open the door. We exchanged a few words. He looked at me suspiciously, and then, out of the blue, he told me a joke. And I was tired, but this man was so good to me, and what is even more, the warm cabin of his Mercedes, that at first I laughed out of politeness, and then actually bent in half from laughter. As soon as he saw it, he opened the door. "Get in," he said. We drove off in general. He squinted at me. We chatted about various things. I even got a little nervous. And then he asks what I've been doing here all this time. I told him that I wanted to hitchhike to the Barents Sea, and that's all, and I was delayed on the highway because no one picked me up. Then the man grinned and said that I was lucky that he got me. And then he goes on to say, "Here after sunset the roadside is empty, Sonia. Local villagers, city dwellers, only in cars pass this section and do not stop. And while it's light, they pick up voters, but that's the way it is if they know each other. I'm from here, I'm from Murmansk. I know the places well. I've traveled the whole region. And if someone sees a pedestrian on the side of the road in the dark, he presses the accelerator to the floor and skips past. We have a story that this is not an ordinary passenger. Well, as a story, village women will tell you anything you want. It depends on their skill. The legend is rather local, and I've heard it since childhood. In general, they roam along the road in the evenings until midnight. In the darkness, you can't make out what they look like, and no one has the courage to stop and take a closer look. Those who did, they won't tell. They're called companions, and they've been wandering around for 100 years. There used to be logging camps here during the communist era, when they were clearing land for interchanges and making branches off the highway. Special contingents were brought from all over the Black Earth. The places are remote, you can't walk to settlements without a map, so they didn't keep much watch over the camps. Where will you go from here? One day we lost a whole shift at the sawmill. 12 men vanished like they never existed. They rushed to look for them, pulled up sailors from the base, scoured the woods, and after a week they began to catch them one by one. Zeks, they are united only in front of the camp administration. But as soon as they are out in the open, everyone starts pulling the blanket on himself. So they quarreled in the woods and scattered on their own. 4 of them, though, kept to each other, 3 old and a young one. And the young one was not an easy one. The son of some party member, he got a serious prison sentence. His father couldn't get him off. He was only 5 years old, I think, but the thugs managed to talk him out of it. In the newspapers of the nearest towns, there was a warning to stay out of the woods for mushrooms and berries, or else. They put out bulletins in the departments, and when they found them, they calmed down. What do you mean, calm down? Newspaper men and those who weren't directly involved in the search. The thing was, Sonia, the loners they caught were saying some creepy things about the mores of these 3, the oldest scumbags, and every next one got creepier and creepier. When they caught the rest of them except those 4, the cops were running around like shotguns. You know who they call canned in the camps? That's right. You know what I mean? The last guy they caught told them that they were out of food. The 3 instigators started looking at their own cash. That's why the others ran away. They got sick of themselves. That kid's dad howled, personally wandered through the woods with searchers. Not a word in the papers so as not to cause panic. They found him. Hunger had learned its lesson earlier. And the worst thing is, they didn't get to the highway for a kilometer. They could have gotten something to eat there. After that, the bosses gave an unspoken order to kill them on the spot. And they did shoot them a couple days later. They hid in the swamps, thinking they wouldn't be found there. They were having a meal when the sailors jumped out at them. They didn't even have time to nibble their bones. They loaded the bodies on the rover and took it to town, but it fell into the mire. The driver barely had time to jump out, so they left them in the swamp. And after a couple seasons, people started disappearing in the area. Those who went walking along the road in the evening were on the missing persons list. People became cautious, stopped walking here. It seemed to quiet down for a year, and then they started finding empty cars on the side of the road. All as one, nose buried in the ground, as if it had jumped off the road at speed, doors open, things overturned and no trace of them around. They blamed the raiders, patrols, ambushes, but to no avail. And people around, not the police. It is not shameful for them to believe in devilish things. That's why, when rumors about strange people standing on the night road started, they realized everything at once. Then they almost stopped finding empty cars. Nobody stops. Rarely happens, but the license plates aren't local. Those who pass by this devilish thing tell me that when the light hits their eyes, it is immediately obvious that there is no human being there, because it is like two saucers glowing. And the longer they go without food, the wider their eyes open. That's why I was shining the light in your eyes, checking. Another driver, from Murmansk, said that he unknowingly braked a truck at night. He was saved by the fact that the cab was high. He couldn't reach the window at once. He was just about to roll down the window to talk, like I did with you, and this creature was already standing under the door. It's dark, you can't see anything. And she said to him, "Open up, man. I'm asking you from the bottom of my heart." The chauffeur crossed himself, fired up his car, and drove away. He says people don't wheeze like that and don't look at you like wolves in the dark. When he started to accelerate, the thing hit the door with all its might. Good metal, the thing didn't reach the window. The glass would have shattered. He drove for a long time. He didn't sleep a wink till morning. At first light, he found a parking lot where there were people and stood there. He came out, looked at the door, and there wasn't a dent, but a tear, as if a rebar had been stuck in and driven through. The guys who were in the parking lot crowded together when they saw it and told him everything. They say that sometimes human bones are found in the bogs, piled up and nibbled to bits. And when a whole group of foreign tourists disappeared here, the cops raided the forests. They walked for a long time until they finally found the bones sucked. And among them was a nail shiv, the kind they make behind bars. After those events, by the way, there were no accidents for a long time. They're full, I guess. That's how it is, Sonia. I'm not gonna lie. As long as I've been driving, I've never seen anything like this. Sometimes something glittered in the headlights, but it could be foxes or wolves. They still roam here. And once something ran across the road. It was as big as a man, but it moved like an animal. Maybe a wolf, maybe one of these. Anyway, we haven't had a missing person or an empty car around here in 3 or 4 years. Either it's died down or they're lying. One thing scares me. If these things are real, they must be starving. I listened to this man, to the measured rocking of the cabin, at the same time struggling with sleep. Of course, it was creepy to imagine such things at night, but so tired for those several hours of walking, my body fell into slumber with pleasure. The driver continued to tell stories and answering him sluggishly. I leaned against the window and began to doze off. Road signs, trees, poles, rare oncoming cars did not dilute the emptiness of the night highway. In a half-sleep, I looked at the glare of the light that had been floating among the trees for several minutes. It was as if the light of the moon was falling on the bike's reflectors. You know, I'm not a scaredy cat. I've heard worse stories than that, and I was practically involved. But then I got a cramp. The exhausted trucker continued his stream of speech, and I was horrified to see 2 huge luminous eyes in the thicket, moving parallel to our car and keeping their attentive and very hungry gaze on me. I turned back to the driver, noticing that he had stopped talking abruptly and was staring at the road. The silhouette on the side of the road was fast approaching, and I was torn by 2 feelings: to squeeze into the seat and become invisible, and at the same time to nestle against the glass and examine, as far as possible in the darkness, this voter when we would rush past. "Oh, Sonia, how lucky you are that I picked you up," muttered the chauffeur then, keeping his eyes fixed on the uncanny figure. Most of all, it resembled a cat staring at you out of the darkness, the light from a flashlight reflected in its eyes. Our truck was carrying at a decent speed, and that was at least a little comforting, but at the same time we drove by so fast that everything became a blur. And somewhere on the edge of hearing, I heard a disappointed howl. There was a puff of smoke right outside my door. I looked out the window and, "Drop him off. We won't hurt you. He's ours. Our prey. Why did you pick him up?" A wheezing, growling, panting voice came from the other side of the cabin. A shadow exactly like the one under my door moved in leaps and bounds behind the truck and addressed the trucker demandingly. The man frowned, pressed his lips together, and only gave gas, forcing the creatures to stay. Further, we drove in oppressive silence until the trucker shrieked and drowned the klaxon button. I jumped at the deafening honk and looked into the distance. The car coming from the left suddenly swerved to the side, and I could see a shadow flicker in front of it and jump out in front of me. As it jumped out into the oncoming traffic, it narrowly avoided a head-on collision. A man and a woman, the horror on their faces, were already saying goodbye to their lives. There were children's hands clutched in the back of the driver's seat. He braked right in the middle of the road. The trucker and I looked at each other, and the first impulse to stop and intervene immediately passed when the side mirrors finally reflected what was happening around the car of the unfortunate people. Remember these coordinates: Murmansk region, Highway E105, the section between Monchegorsk and Pyrenga. Never stop there after sunset.